In 1968, a scientist built a paradise. There was unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, no disease, no overcrowding. At first, he filled it with mice, and then he watched civilization collapse. The scientist's name was John B. Calhoun. He was an ethologist at the National Institute of Mental Health, and the experiment he ran, across multiple iterations over nearly 3 decades, produced results that still make researchers uncomfortable today. Not because of what happened to the mice, because of what the mice started to resemble. The most famous version of the experiment was called Universe 25. It began in 1968. Calhoun constructed a sealed metal enclosure roughly the size of a large room. Inside it, he installed everything a mouse could ever need: food hoppers, water dispensers, nesting materials, tunnels, ramps. He introduced 8 mice, 4 males and 4 females. The enclosure was enormous relative to those 8 animals. There was more space, more food, more water than they could ever use. The population exploded. Within the first few months, the mice were healthy, social, and forming the kind of hierarchies that mouse communities normally produce. Dominant males claimed territories, females nested, young mice learned their place in a working social order. Every 55 days, the number of mice doubled. They were healthy, well-fed, and reproducing at maximum rate. By day 315, the population had reached its peak: 2,200 mice. Then it stopped. And then it started going backward. But here's the part most people get wrong about the Calhoun experiments. The enclosure was not overcrowded in any conventional sense. There was still enough food, there was still enough water. The physical space, while busy, could have supported far more animals. What ran out was not resources. What ran out was meaningful social roles. Every mouse society has a structure. Dominant males hold territory, they protect nesting spaces, they compete, they fight, they reproduce, they perform a function. But as the population grew, every available territory was claimed. Every role was filled. Young males who would have normally fought their way into the hierarchy arrived to find no room at all. They had nowhere to go, nowhere to win, nowhere to belong. Calhoun called this a behavioral sink. The term first appeared in his landmark 1962 paper in Scientific American, written before Universe 25 began. The behavioral sink described what happened when population density, or more precisely, social density, exceeded what a species could psychologically absorb. In a healthy mouse society, density creates competition, and competition creates structure. Animals sort themselves into hierarchies, find their place, and function. But past a certain threshold, density stopped creating structure and started destroying it. And the behavioral sink produced something nobody predicted. The affected mice didn't fight more. They didn't riot. They didn't die from starvation. They withdrew. A specific class of mice began to appear. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. They were physically perfect: glossy coats, no wounds, no scars, no signs of the fighting that marked the dominant males. They ate, they slept, they groomed themselves obsessively, and they did nothing else. They never fought for territory. They never courted females. They never established hierarchies. When approached by other mice, they simply walked away. They had, in a very specific sense, opted out of mouse society entirely. And they were not the only failure mode. Dominant males became hyper-violent, attacking without provocation. Females began to display aggressive male behaviors. Mothers abandoned their young or attacked them. Some mothers stopped building nests altogether, giving birth in open corridors where the young had no protection. Infant mortality climbed toward 100% toward the end of the experiment. The population did not just decline, it became incapable of recovery. Here is the detail that makes Universe 25 genuinely strange. Even when Calhoun removed mice from the collapsing population and placed them in fresh environments with plenty of space, many of them could not recover normal social behaviors. The beautiful ones, in particular, never reproduced. Even in isolation, even with willing partners, even with every material condition in their favor. Whatever had been switched off inside them did not switch back on. The behavioral damage was not environmental, it was internal. It had been encoded somewhere that food and space alone could not reach. The last mouse in Universe 25 died in 1970. The population had gone from 8 to 2,200, and then all the way back down to 0. The entire arc took roughly 4 years. Calhoun published his findings and spent the rest of his career applying the model to human populations. This is where the experiment gets uncomfortable. He wasn't the first to notice the parallel. Almost immediately after his 1962 paper, social scientists and urban planners began citing the behavioral sink to explain riots, crime spikes, and social withdrawal in overcrowded cities. The comparison was often misused. Human beings are not mice. Our social structures are vastly more complex. We have language, culture, law, art, and institutions specifically designed to manage density. But Calhoun himself was not simply making the overcrowding argument. He was making a stranger, more specific claim. He argued that what destroyed Universe 25 was not the number of bodies in the space. It was the collapse of purpose. When there are no roles left to fill, when the path to significance is blocked, when a creature, or a person, cannot find a meaningful place in the structure around them, the response is not always aggression. Sometimes it is a much quieter exit. Calhoun called this death of the second kind. Physical death was the first kind, but a creature could stop engaging with its social world entirely while still technically alive. It could eat, it could sleep, it could maintain a perfectly healthy body, and it could contribute absolutely nothing to the survival or continuation of the society around it. It could become, in his words, a beautiful one. Researchers today debate how far Calhoun's model applies beyond rodents. His experimental conditions were artificial. The enclosure created a specific kind of social pressure that doesn't map cleanly onto human cities or communities. But certain patterns in his data are hard to set aside. The sequence always followed the same order. First growth, then competition, then crowding at the top, then withdrawal, then a collapse that could not be reversed even when conditions improved. The timing and shape of that arc appeared in every iteration of the experiment Calhoun ran, not just Universe 25. He ran this experiment 25 times. The result was the same every time. The thing that strikes researchers most is not the violence. It is the irreversibility. The beautiful ones could not be fixed by simply giving them more space. They had crossed some internal threshold that better circumstances could not undo. That specific detail, the threshold that space and resources cannot reach, is why Calhoun's work keeps getting cited decades after his death in 1995. It suggests that some forms of social damage operate below the level of material conditions, that meaning, belonging, and the sense of having a role to play are not secondary needs on top of food and shelter. They may be as fundamental as either one. Calhoun spent his final years trying to design the opposite of Universe 25. He called it the most important problem in the world. Not overpopulation, not resource scarcity, but the design of environments where purpose remains available, where the path to significance stays open, where there is always a role left to fill. He never finished the work. He died in 1995, still drawing blueprints. And without them, even a paradise, carefully constructed, endlessly supplied, completely safe, will eventually fall quiet. Not with a bang, but with 8,000 perfectly groomed mice who have simply decided not to participate.